Last night, the northern Ukrainian town of Sumy was hit. Just like Odessa, Zaporizhia, Mykolaiv and other towns over the weekend. Missiles and drone swarms launched from deep inside Russian territory. The Russian military safe in the knowledge not only that the Ukrainians are running short of anti-aircraft munitions, but also that Ukraine doesn't have the capacity to fire back. Or rather, it doesn't have the permission. The US has provided Ukraine with ATACMS, long-range surface-to-surface supersonic guided missiles, seen here on exercise in South Korea. President Zelensky has long told President Biden that they need to hit targets deep inside Russia. But the relaxing of the rules only allows use in a small part of Russia, which Ukraine seized in August, and where it now faces North Korean as well as Russian troops. Biden says Ukraine can use ATACMS to strike Russian and North Korean targets across the border in Kursk, where the Ukrainians are fighting a counteroffensive. But the US still isn't allowing Ukraine to use ATACMS with their 300-kilometer range to strike bases from which the Russians are attacking Ukrainian cities.
Even in the range of ATACMS ballistic missiles, we have around 250 Russian military objects that are around Russian-Ukrainian border. So it would be a real game changer if we would gain this total permission by US, by UK and France to use ballistic missiles like ATACMS, like Storm Shadow, on Russian territory to strike deep into Russian territory.
The Russian Ministry of Defense has released pictures of its air offensive. They say the decision on ATACMS raises a new spiral of tension, but NATO says it's Russia that is escalating the war which it started.
We see the dangerous expansion of the war, with North Korean troops fighting alongside Russia against Ukraine. This comes on top of the supply of ammunition that North Korea provides, the drones from Iran, and the dual-use goods supplied by China, all of which fuel Russia's war machine.
Today, President Putin was meeting the man he installed as governor of Zaporizhia, a region of Ukraine Russia partially occupies. As he waits for President-elect Trump to take office, he's trying to take as much territory as possible to negotiate from a position of strength. President Zelensky was visiting troops near the front line in Pokrovsk.
The Pokrovsk section is very tense. I know that thanks to your resilience, the east hasn't been occupied in its entirety by the Russian Federation. The enemy gets our responses every day from you and from your brothers in arms. I want you to know that the Ukrainian people are very thankful.
He knows only too well the strain the troops are under, outnumbered, outgunned and exhausted. The Ukrainians say every time the US or other NATO countries have provided better weapons or relaxed the rules for their use, it's been far too late. The people of Odessa are wondering how much more of this they can take. Tomorrow marks 1,000 days since the war began. 1,000 days when they've had NATO backing, just not enough to prevail, not enough to prevent the dismemberment of their country.
Well, Fabrice Potier is a former NATO Director of Policy and was an advisor to President Macron. He joins us now from Madrid. Good evening. This new permission is very limited and very late. What real difference does it make?
Like you said, I think this is sadly too little too late, and this is part of a long series of decisions that have been constantly behind the curve in terms of responding to Russian escalation. And clearly, I mean, we don't get the full picture, but it seems that the US decision is only for the Kursk Oblast perimeter, which leaves again this logic of giving the Ukrainian just enough to fight, but always with one hand tied in their back. So I would say there's a symbolic value to the decision. There is a kind of new threshold. We will have to see to what extent the UK and France are supporting this with their own cruise missiles, long-range cruise missiles. But the reality is that in the quantitative logic of this war, it's not going to fundamentally change the Ukrainian position.
I mean, Russia rudely talks about America and its satellites, meaning Britain and France and others in NATO. But when you look at the decision-making, it's hard to see that they're wrong. I mean, if Britain and France want to give Ukraine more permission to use the weapons that they send, why can't they? Is it that America just calls the shots?
We see the US from a qualitative and a quantitative point of view is indispensable in making the key decisions in how to support and how to manage this war. The problem here is that we are dealing with a US administration that has been, in my view, overly worried and overly thinking all the possible escalation options. And by the time it has concluded that somehow escalation can be managed, Putin is already escalating with other means. So unfortunately, we have that dependence on what Washington says and does. And you're right, it ties our hands also in how the other capitals, especially London and Paris, but also Berlin, are willing to do.
Right, but when Trump is in power and the disagreement in strategy is much more pronounced, will it still be the case that Britain, France and Germany do what they're told? Will it have to be the case?
I think you're making an assumption that I don't fully subscribe to. I would not necessarily think there is a fundamental disagreement between an incoming Trump administration and Europe. I think the incoming Trump administration seems to have some, I would say, some right instincts on what to do with the war. First, to finish the war, to end this war, which is obviously very important, especially for the Ukrainians, but also to try to inject some strength and leverage to move the key disruptive actor here, which is Russia. And I would call on the European government not to sit and wait on what Trump is going to do, but try to do a Trump-compatible strategy and embrace it and try to shape the terms of a deal.
I mean, that sounds optimistic, but when you look at what Trump Jr. says today, it's much closer to the Russian position than it is to the European.
You're right. There are lots of divergent voices and often voices that are against the logical interest of Ukraine and of Europe. But there are also voices around Trump that are, I would say, more sensible and more aware that a bad deal will actually look bad for Donald Trump. So I think he's got every interest to have something where Ukraine can hold on the long term, rather than something like Afghanistan, where you will have a collapse on his watch, and he doesn't like to look bad.
Fabrice Potier, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.